Am I on? Oh, there we go. Okay. I messed with the mute button a lot and I didn't know which direction it was anymore. Good morning, Calvary. So, uh, this is a hard passage to preach on. The prophets usually are hard passages to preach on, especially for me, a privileged white male. In the case of the prophet Isaiah, he is often, and all of the prophets really, are often preaching to people in power. In this case, the kings of Israel. But I was challenged to preach on this passage because the last time that I preached about the outsider and how the outsider can be an example of faith to us. And as I was talking with people afterwards, I was approached by a congregant, and she said, "That was great, but what about the insider? What about those who are inside the church walls, who can continue to hear the cries of injustice and violence out in the world and do nothing about it?" And then as I looked at the passages in the lectionary this week, it seemed that I was set up to indeed talk about the insider, to talk about myself as a privileged person within the church. We read this story in Isaiah, this what is called the Song of the Vineyard. And the people of Israel are called to make a judgment on the production of a vineyard, and it goes into everything that the vineyard owner has done. The vineyard owner has tended to it well, has watered it, has protected it, has made sure that it has been given everything that it needs to produce good fruit. And then the vineyard owner calls on the people of Israel and Judah to make a judgment. Is it the vineyard or is it the vineyard owner that is at fault? It is a trap, a trick that the prophet uses, much like the prophet Nathan uses on David after he has sent Uriah to the front lines, and he comes in and tells a story of a rich man who has sheep and herds, and a poor man who has one ewe. He brings up that little lamb as if it is a child. He feeds him from the table. And meanwhile, the rich man welcomes a friend from out of town, and instead of taking one of his herd, he goes across the street and takes the lamb of the poor man. When it gets to this point, Scripture tells us that David is seething and exclaims to Nathan, "As God lives, this man deserves to die." And then that trick, just like the trick that we read in Isaiah, Nathan turns it around and says, "That man is you." Isaiah turns it around and says, "Israel, that is you. You have produced junk grapes because I expected justice out of you and got violence. I expected righteousness and heard a cry." The reality of this passage is that oftentimes we are the vineyard, producing junk grapes. This call is a hard one because it turns the judgment on ourselves. It is very easy to look outside our walls and to declare injustice by all of the people outside there. It is easy for us to look at the problems of climate change and global warming and to blame it on others, to say, well, it's China and all of their industry, and they are the main instigators in that trouble. It is very easy for us to look at the speck in our eye and say it's not that big a deal, and to look at the plank in the eyes of those outside these walls and say they're the ones that are at fault. But if we look closely, we contribute greatly to the ways in which we are destroying God's good creation. There are two trash piles in the middle of the Atlantic and the Pacific Ocean. One of them in the Pacific Ocean is now 1.6 million square kilometers, the size of Alaska, contributed to by our own production of waste. We look at the movie WALL-E, and it's almost a prophetic imagining of what we have done. We will put all of the trash onto this good creation, and then we will move somewhere else in order to begin trashing that. It is a hard reality that Isaiah speaks to, that we need to act. It is similarly easy to look at the current policies and practices of our current administration and decry the violence that is done to immigrants and to people of color and to people of different faith backgrounds. It is much harder to look back at presidents before that we agreed with and to decry the violence that they participated in. To decry the violence of the drone strikes that Barack Obama initiated, as if living into the prophetic words of Shakespeare, these violent delights have violent ends. We can continue to go back and look at presidents and leaders from whatever political party that you want and understand that violence has been part of their policies. Violence to Native Americans, violence to women, violence to human beings who are all God's good creation, and much of it is done in the name of God and in the name of democracy. It is hard to look in on ourselves and recognize that. But let me bring it a little closer to home for me. It is also very easy for me to look outside the walls of my church and my upbringing and to look at the atrocities that have been committed by some in the Catholic Church, to decry it as injustice, which it is, but it is much harder for me to look within the walls of my own faith background and my own upbringing. As part of my preparation for this sermon this morning, I read story upon story on a blog called Our Stories Untold. The blog details numerous stories of men and women who have been victims of sexual violence at Mennonite institutions. My heart broke as I read the stories of women and men at Eastern Mennonite University, my alma mater, who were sexually assaulted or raped and brought it to administration, and they were ignored or pushed to the side because those in power did not consider those cries of injustice as worthy. Here in a flagship institution of the Mennonite Church, an institution that prides itself on nonviolence, even there, God expected justice, and there was violence. Expected righteousness, and there was a cry. The words of Isaiah must come to us who are in privilege. A church and a country that has been given more resources than at any other point in history, more wealth than at any other point in history, and still outside the walls of this beautiful sanctuary, there are people that are experiencing homelessness because of an affordable housing crisis. There are people that are outside these walls that will not set foot inside of a church because they have been decried because of their sexuality, because of their viewpoints, because of their color, because of their socioeconomic status. And we as a church are responsible. That is what the words of Isaiah are telling us, is that we are indeed responsible. God gave us grace and expected us to produce fruits of that grace in the form of justice and righteousness. And junk grapes was all that was left. I recently read an interview with Danny McBride. He's a comedian that is starring in a new show on HBO about the family of televangelists. And he said that for research for this project, he interviewed some pastors around the country. And he asked them, what is it that helps you to determine whether or not you as a church are a success? And overwhelmingly, the response that he got from them was, well, if we have more people in the seats than we did the previous year, then it's a success. And if we have less people in the seats, then we get a new leader. It seems like a harsh reality, but I wonder if we as the church have began to look at the church as such a business proposition, as a proposition of numbers rather than the justice and righteousness that we do, rather than the actions that we do for the least, the lost, and the left out. That is an example of the grace that we receive from God. In the words of Isaiah, I hear a call for us to be doers of justice, to be doers of righteousness. And it may seem like a large task. There is so much going on in our world, and it seems overwhelming. And Becky, I thank you for your story this morning because it simplified it. That is doing justice. If someone is being bullied, go and say stop. If someone is sad, go and sit with them and hear their sadness. In the words of Champ Bailey, who was recently inducted into the Hall of Fame, listen to your brothers and sisters of color when they tell you about the atrocities that have been committed against them. When we see the homelessness outside our walls, let's think of creative ways that we might change that. That we might offer this incredible space that we have been blessed with in order that they too might have a space. It seems like an overwhelming thing, but we cannot let our apathy get in the way of doing what we were called to do as the people of God. I hear the words of Amos 5. Let justice roll down like water and righteousness like a mighty stream. And I'm comforted by it, but I don't know that I should be. You see, the power of that water coming down, well, it symbolizes life and hope for the people that have been oppressed. For someone like me, it means change. It means not sitting in my power and privilege. It means not accepting the status quo. It means bending towards the justice and the reign of God, because that powerful water is coming down. And I must be changed. I end this morning with a quote from the late prophet and sojourner for truth, Toni Morrison, who told her students, when you go into these jobs that you have been so brilliantly trained for, just remember that your real job is that if you are free, go free somebody else. If you have some power, then it is your job to empower somebody else. This is not some game of candy grab bag. Or, in the words of another prophet that we know well, Micah, God has shown us, O Calvary, what is good and what the Lord requires of us. But to do justice and to love kindness and to walk humbly with God. This is not some game of candy grab bag. God expects justice and righteousness. The question is, have we produced good fruit or junk grapes? Amen.